Fox has been teasing us with live valve for some time now. We heard rumours about it a couple of years ago, and Eurobike this year, finally it was seen on production bikes. But everybody from Fox was remaining tight-lipped as to exactly what it was. Well, we've actually got a working version of live valve here, and we've been putting some time on it, so we can actually now basically tell you everything about what this new live valve system is all about. So over to Danny.
So like everything that's incredibly complex, of course, Fox has said it's actually really simple in terms of operation, but the way that it works is nothing but simple. So yeah, this is kind of the rise of the robots, really, I suppose, in a way. It's not something that's new to mountain biking, because other people have tried it in the past, like most notably Lapierre had an EI system.
That's right.
A few years ago, which has kind of gradually died a death. No one kind of has heard about it for a while. And also Magura had a kind of an automatic active suspension system as well. But Fox is aiming to offer something a lot more sophisticated that kind of irons out all of the flaws with those other systems and gives you a much more usable real world active suspension system. And by active suspension system, we basically mean suspension that adjusts according to the terrain automatically. So you're not having to do anything with it. So there's no remote controls or buttons or switches that you use while you're riding. You just leave it up to the system. So it's kind of like you might have on some sophisticated cars and off-road vehicles. In fact, Fox has a very successful division specifically for making active suspension for automotive vehicles.
Like Baja races and that
Baja
sort of thing.
races,
Yep.
I think the most famous vehicle would be the Raptor, the Ford Raptor.
Oh yeah,
pickup.
the really cool pickup. Yep.
Yeah, so clever stuff, successful on that side. They're trying to translate it to the mountain bike side. So I'm going to try and describe how this works. Now, I might end up going down some rabbit holes. I might end up completely confusing and baffling everyone, because look, I don't work for Fox. I'm just sort of having to relay what they've relayed to us. So it's not simple, but the way it works is you have a sensor on the fork attached to the brace, the fork brace there.
Sensor behind the brace here, yeah.
Now that's an accelerometer, and it basically measures vertical wheel travel.
Okay.
So it's when it hits a bump, that accelerometer will sense that you've hit a bump.
Yep.
There is also one at the rear wheel, at the rear dropout down here. It's doing exactly the same thing. It's sensing when you hit a bump. Those are combined with a tilt meter in this unit here, which is the main.
That's kind of like the main brain of it, isn't it? Yeah.
Brain unit, exactly. So that detects whether you are on flat ground, whether you are descending, or whether you're climbing. And between those three sensors, it decides whether the shock and the fork are going to be fully open or closed, as in like a pedal platform.
Okay, so not like a proper solid lock, like more of the pedal
Not
platform.
a solid lock.
Yep.
It's a platform. The manufacturer, I believe, can decide how firm that pedal platform is. But yeah, it's not a full lockout. So let's say you are rolling along a smooth fire road, which is fairly flat, then unless you hit something quite a big bump, then the fork won't detect any bumps, so it will remain closed. The shock will remain closed as well, because there's nothing telling it that there's any bumps. And it will basically be a very firm platform, so it's really efficient. You can get out the saddle, you can honk the bike from side to side, and you won't get the suspension to bob. It will feel really firm and responsive and efficient. As soon as you hit a bump, let's say you hit a water bar on a fire road, the fork will feel that water bar, it will send a signal to the control unit, and it will open up the valves front and rear to basically open up the compression damping. So within the sensors are reading at 1,000 hertz, so that's 1,000 times a second.
Yep.
And the valve can open in, I think it is 3 milliseconds. So
faster than blinking an eye, faster than anything else.
Faster than blink of an eye, exactly. Yeah. So it gets the signal that hits a bump, everything opens almost instantaneously, and you get the suspension moving kind of as a fully open active system. Yep. Then after a certain amount of time after that bump, if it doesn't detect another bump, then the valves close. So the duration that they remain open depends on whether you're going on the flat, on the climb, or a descend.
Right.
If you're descending, that duration is much longer. If you're climbing, it's shorter. Effectively, that's kind of the basics. So if you are going down a rough kind of downhill, the idea is that you hit lots of bumps all the time, quite frequently. So that should be enough to basically open the fork up or the shock up for the entire descent. As long as it's not billiard table smooth, you're going to be always hitting little bumps, and so everything's going to open up, and it's going to be like riding with the suspension open. That's the idea. So I've looked at the firmware, I've been shown the firmware, it's pretty complex, but what it's basically doing is reading three things: the force of the bump, the angle that you're traveling at, and then the duration that the valve remains open. And that's how it has different settings for those three types of terrain: descending, climbing, and flat. And that's how it tries to optimize its settings for those three types of terrain. So there's a lot going
pretty
on.
Complicated.
And
Sounds pretty complicated.
Yeah, that's not even the whole story.
I was going to say, that's like bring it down, isn't it?
Yeah, we can go into more details. There's 5 different settings, for instance, on the control unit, which adjust the sensitivity of the suspension. So, position 1, for instance, won't need much of a bump at all. A small bump input or bump force to open up the suspension, whereas bump 5 will need a much larger or much bigger bump force to open up the system. So there's 5 settings there. The whole firmware is completely customizable. Fortunately, at the moment, they're just leaving that to the OEMs, to the brands themselves, and not even every brand apparently has access to change these settings, because it's just a myriad of possibilities.
I suppose for everyone that you could get right, you could get 10 different things wrong.
Exactly. Yeah. It literally is a minefield you're walking through, and the chances of maybe producing a kind of poorly performing setting is really high. So they don't, at the moment, they don't want to allow even some OEM product managers to play with these things. Wow. It's kind of Fox technicians, trusted OEMs, and certainly not consumers at the moment. Right. That's not to say possibly in the future there might not be some kind of simplified app for playing with it, but at the moment, let's just say you get the bike with it fitted, and you're not going to be tinkering with that stuff.
It's literally the buttons on there settings. And that's it. Yeah.
You've also got an off setting, which is interesting. So you can actually turn the whole thing off and just ride the bike completely normally, like you would without live valve on it. Yeah. And that means that if your battery does run out, you can still ride home and the bike will feel completely normal. Or if you prefer to have it open in some situations, then you can do that. So they're kind of trying to offer like every eventuality to people. Yeah. So in a nutshell, that's kind of what it does. Now, I guess the really nerdy trickery is that in the valves themselves, which use a solenoid valve, so that you have an electromagnetic pulse. There's 2 magnets, and by changing the polarity of one, you attract or repel the magnet. So you open and close the valve like that. So it uses an incredibly small amount of power from the battery, and it's an incredibly quick action. So one of the main things obviously is to try and reduce the amount of battery consumption. So, and that's what that does. And when you ride the bike, you can hear the valves opening and closing. There's like a popping noise, like
it's quite
sound,
quite
like,
strange, isn't it? At first,
yeah, it's like kind of popping candy or something like that in your mouth. It's kind of pop, 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 and it's happening all the time, and it really is just kind of shows to you how much is going on with the electronics on the system. Yet, kind of a lot of the time, you don't really feel a dramatic change to the ride of the bike. So it's quite an interesting feeling in many ways, and Fox wanted it to feel seamless, and I think in that respect they have achieved their goal in that you do not feel dramatic changes. You do not really feel the system working. You hear it working on flat terrain. When you're going downhill, always a lot more is happening.
A lot more noise,
wind
isn't
noise,
there? So,
suspension, kind of just hitting bumps, chain noise, whatever. So you don't really hear the valves working. But on a smoothest bit of fire road or whatever, or a climb, then you hear the valves opening and closing. So quite an interesting system. Yeah, I mean, I'm not all for electronics on bikes. I'm a little bit, although I wouldn't say I'm a Luddite by any means.
Oh, just a bit old school. You like the traditional.
At the end of the day, electronics are great if they give you a benefit. And that's what you've always got to look for. That's the ultimate question you've got to answer, isn't it? It's kind of, does this make my ride better than not having it? Does this make the bike perform better? So, these are the questions.
It's the $1 million question, isn't it, really?
Exactly.
So with that in mind then, we've both actually had a chance to put some time in this. So does it make it better?
That is the $1 million question, or around about $3,000.
Right. So if
we're going to be specific about, it depends on what fork and shock you go for. If you're buying it separately, but it's around about $3,000 from the pricing we've been given at the moment. We don't have UK pricing yet,
and obviously it needs quite specific sort of frame sort of parts to it, doesn't it? To actually
at the moment there's a list of brands that have compatible frames. There's Scott, obviously. There's Pivot. There's Rocky Mountain. And Giant, I believe, are the main brands.
They're kind of like the four main brands, that
have all the mounting hardware, kind of routing for cables and stuff like that. There's a few brands, and also those brands will be doing OEM bikes spec with this on.
Right.
And that is significantly cheaper than buying it aftermarket and bolting it onto your existing frame if it's compatible. You're basically pretty much roughly looking about half that price, maybe around $1,800. They're saying as a kind of
on top of like a bike with a normal
exactly.
shock.
If we took one model without live valve and one with, everything else is the same, you're probably looking at about $1,800 extra. So it's a significant,
quite significant
amount of money. That it is a big upgrade in terms of financial upgrade, and the interesting thing, I think, is that Fox are saying that in the future they hope to bring that gap down considerably to around about $1,000.
Right.
It's kind of like roughly half the price that it is at the moment, I would say.
So they're obviously sort of right behind this system. They're quite happy with how it works.
I mean, they've spent a long time developing it. And they wouldn't do that if they didn't think there was a future for it. That, whether that is true remains to be seen. We shall see. I think electronics we're going to be seeing a lot more electronics on mountain bikes in the next few years. Whether the market accepts it or not, it will be interesting to see. I think it will be a slow burner compared to road bikes, but we could probably make a video about that, talking about for about half an hour on the subject of whether or not mountain bikers are going to adopt electronics or not. But so back to the original question, which was, do I think it is worth it? And I'll be honest, I'll be upfront. I haven't ridden it for weeks. I've done 2 rides on it on very familiar trails. So, I wouldn't like to really sort of stake my flag in the ground, particularly at this point, but the way it stands at the moment, I'm skeptical as to how much benefit it gives to me. Now, I guess I'm coming at my approach to this is as a kind of trail rider, I suppose. I enjoy descending and single track, kind of flat and fast, technical single
the
track.
fun stuff, don't you? Yeah, that's where you are.
I'm not looking for efficiency particularly. I'm quite happy to pedal in the saddle, just kind of get myself up something and then enjoy the descent. So I want a bike that's optimized really for the descents, I suppose. So perhaps in that respect, I'm not the ideal person that this is aimed at. But then again, they are aiming it at trail riders because that's what the OEMs are fitting it to.
Yeah, fitting
it to trail bikes.
That's the curious thing, isn't it? So like we were talking about this earlier, and sort of it looks like because Scott are putting it on their, is it the Genius?
On the Genius, not putting it on the Spark at the moment. So they're not putting it on their XC race bike, they're putting it on their trail bike. So yes, maybe I'm not the person that they're aiming at this at, but also it seems to be that this is
you
what
are the
bikes,
person, yeah.
So actually, at second glance, perhaps I am. So anyway, I don't think at the moment it gave me enough advantage for me to think I want this system on my bike. And the reason for that is on kind of flatter terrain, fire roads, smoother climbs where you can get out the saddle, I definitely felt that there was an advantage because it was more efficient. A lot of my power was going into moving the bike forward rather than bobbing the suspension. And in that respect, it was great. But I don't get out the saddle on climbs like that. I just sit down. Yeah. I'm not fussed about, gaining a couple of seconds.
Yeah, not fast as at the top of the hill, fast as down the hill.
Yeah.
That's kind of like the thing.
It's a really good way of using burning your energy, getting out the saddle. And, unless you're racing, I would never, it's not something I would ever do, sprint out of the saddle.
Yeah.
So, I could see the benefit in that area. But it's not something I do, in my rides regularly. And then when it came to the fun stuff, to the single track, to the descents, the bike didn't feel predictable enough to me. It wasn't doing what I was anticipating it doing. Say where you've got a kind of a fairly rough trail, of rough descent, maybe not super steep but mellow, and you're pumping the ground. You need to preload the bike to pop it over some roots, or you want to pop into a little compression to get the downslope to get a bit of speed, and you're constantly sort of weighting the bike, and you're using the springs to generate speed and maintain momentum and move the bike around the trail. On this, I didn't feel like I could do that because I was always pushing against that pedal platform or that platform.
Right.
And I tried to kind of work out why that was, and when you look at the firmware, it shouldn't necessarily be doing that because you should be hitting enough bumps that the system should be remaining open.
Staying open, yeah.
So I'm not quite sure why I had that feeling, but I had that feeling on both rides, and to kind of give myself a comparison, I switched the whole system off and I rode it with it off, and it instantly felt more like a normal bike, so more predictable, and I could use the suspension to preload, and it just felt just a lot more like I'm sort of used to riding, a lot more playful, a lot more consistent, confidence inspiring, I guess. I wasn't kind of tiptoeing. I was actually more dynamic on the bike, and I carried more speed. I was able to move the bike onto the lines that I wanted to, and it just felt a lot more natural to me. So it was, for me, it was pretty cut and dried that I preferred it with it off. It's interesting, but I look at the way the system works. I look at the firmware, and I scratch my head because it shouldn't be open. It shouldn't be closed in those situations.
It should be working the way that you wanted it. Yeah.
So there are elements where there's interpretation involved in how the firmware is set up, like the tilt sensor, for instance. It doesn't go into downhill mode until you're, I think, over -6 degrees or something, and you can adjust that. So it depends how it's set up with what they categorize as downhill and uphill. So maybe there's something to do with that. Maybe I was still in the kind of flat mode, and that was, the bumps weren't big enough, or the valve wasn't open long enough for it to feel natural. So yeah, I'm in kind of, I don't know, without lots of tinkering around, maybe you could dial that out of the system and it would feel great. But at the moment, as it stands on this bike in this configuration, I wasn't sold on it.
No.
So I've been straight off. I just ride a normal bike at the moment. But you come from it from more of a kind of XC racing perspective, let's say. Yeah. So you rode it as well. Is that how did you feel about it?
Yeah, it's an interesting thing, because obviously, I've ridden the Spark RC quite a lot, so I know how that bike rides as it is normally. And for me, as like sort of cross country and actually getting out of the saddle and riding fast, I actually felt that there were some good advantages of the system. So what I was a bit sort of aware of is a bit like Specialized Brain, is that you were sometimes not sure whether you were in the right setting. Because obviously, like you said before, there's those 5 different settings. So I was playing around with what felt right. And for the trails that I was riding, probably about sort of setting 4, which is pretty firm, felt great. But then I said, I'm willing to sort of sacrifice a little bit of that sort of active nature for the efficiency. Yeah. So I spent the whole time riding it kind of scratching my head thinking, right, okay, what am I actually getting from this? And what was good, and I think it was good about the system, is a lot of the times I was thinking, oh, it doesn't feel like it's firming up. It feels like weird, still feels active. I was looking down and going, no, it's bang solid. So I was getting that sort of that active impression, but still getting that efficiency. Yeah. So I kind of had that sort of, that almost thinking, yeah, this does definitely work. But I think from a play perspective, and this bike is actually set up quite a fun sort of like setup. It is, yeah. I did notice, same as yourself, that when you turned it off, it felt a little bit faster. So, and this is a production unit, isn't it? It's not pre-production or anything. This is literally how it's going to be. Yep. And yeah, as I said, I think from a racing perspective, it gives you something extra that you don't have to think about. So you don't have to think about turning the lock on and off. And I think you said, like, there's something about the amount of times that racers were using lockouts is crazy, isn't it, in races?
I think in an XC race, they were nearly 100 times or something, or maybe more in an hour and a half race or something like that.
I do that, and I find sometimes I actually get fatigue in my thumb and I can't actually shift, or I can't actually lock out. So that system is pretty good from that point of view. But it does get me scratching my head as to who it's aimed at. Yeah. I think as you said, they've put it on trail bikes, and I was thinking, right, who is actually going to benefit from the system? And all I could really think about was cross country racers. Yeah. From that obvious sort of perspective, and then enduro racing. Yeah. At those sort of levels where you have the bits where you need to pedal, then have it all open, so you don't have to think about stuff. Yeah. But for them then to be putting it on the trail bikes is a kind of a bit of a curiosity, isn't it?
Yeah. So Fox haven't been particularly specific about who they're aiming this at. They have said they don't expect XC racers to use it because of the weight penalty. It's not hugely heavy. I think I couldn't give you exact weights because it depends on what fork, what shock you use and stuff.
And the frame platform as well, isn't it?
That's right. But they say that it's I think it's about 180 grams heavier than Scott's twin lock system. Okay. If you include all of the cables and the cable housing, everything like that. say you've got, your Nino Shirton, you've got a Spark RC with the Scott twin lock system on it. He's only going to have a 180 gram weight penalty, which, really isn't much.
It's not actually, no.
So, but, a lot of XC racers don't have that kind of system like Scott system. So then they're going to pay a heavier penalty, maybe 300 grams or something like that. But yes, they're not marketing it as an XC race product. Although they also talk about XC racers and how many times they use their lockouts in XC racing. They also talk about Greg Callahan specifically, who's a top EWS racer, in testing with this system, gaining 2 seconds on a stage where he thought he was absolutely flat out at his maximum pace. So they're also talking, they're using examples of enduro racers, top flight enduro racers gaining advantages. Obviously, in that little soundbite that they've added, they don't say how long the stage was that Greg Callahan was riding. They don't say what kind of terrain he was riding it on. So, if there was numerous flat sections or little uphills on a long stage, 2 seconds is not a lot.
Not much, is it?
But he is saying that there's a potential advantage there. To be fair, you look at people like Jerome Clements, he still has a lockout with his bike
for
on a
coil,
little twist shift.
Yeah.
A lot of other racers do for certain courses.
Cecile Revenel has one.
Yeah.
They all have that sort of system.
There are advantages to be had. It's whether there's more of an advantage to let electronics work out when to turn this platform on for you, or whether you can just do it yourself. And for me, I think that if I was doing an EWS race or something, and I have done a few, so I kind of know what they're like, I would rather be able to operate it myself, because there would be fairly few and far between these kind of sections where I'd want it, a firmer, pedal platform when I'm out of the saddle or something, rather than having a system that's constantly looking for those little tiny bits of advantage. I'm still skeptical, even though they're kind of offering up these potential advantages, these situations where it could be an advantage. One thing I won't argue with is that it does clean up your cockpit significally.
Yeah, especially compared to a normal Scott.
Exactly, and you've got a dropper remote actually under the handlebars, which is great. So that's an advantage. But you're talking a lot of money. This is $3,000 for roughly
clearing up a little bit of your handlebars.
Clearing up.
Obviously, that's just very simplifying it. So,
there is a lot more to it But in terms of riding it on the trail, it's nothing you can't just reach down and change, because I think those situations where it really makes the advantage, they're not regular, frequent enough that I would want to kind of activate that pedal platform. I hardly ever use my pedal platform, and maybe that's why I don't see the advantage of the system, perhaps, because someone maybe who does regularly use it, maybe that is more for them. But I'm definitely kind of I'm on the fence. Well, at the moment I'm slightly on the other side.
Slightly over the fence at the moment, isn't it? It's like just gone from straddling to 3/4.
I'm a little bit on the other side of the fence.
Yeah,
they're going to need some convincing, I would say, to.
I think so, because as you said, like the expense. One of the things you'll find is probably a lot of the people that will be riding it will be people that will be sponsored and actually be riding it because they're given it. So the amount of people that will actually want to buy it for that I'm finding it hard to work out who would actually do it. As I said, like, I'm probably a little bit more from that cross country sort of like perspective, thinking. Yeah, it's good because it's better than specialized brain system, because you can actually, if you need to, you can adjust stuff there, so it's all good, and you've got that efficiency there. So I got a couple of Strava PRs like when I rode on Saturday. So
it's earned its money
obviously
already.
the bike there, but it's definitely something that I need to spend a bit more time on. So
yeah, and you know, must be believing strongly in this product, because we have not only Fox obviously spending a lot of money on developing this, but you've got people like Scott, Pivot, and Giant fitting it to their bikes for next year. Sticking their neck out, changing their molds to accommodate the system, putting bikes in their ranges. And it's not an insignificant price hike for someone. Suddenly you've got another $2,000 on a price on quite a high end bike already. That's no small potatoes, is it? So
no.
It's going to be interesting to see how it's received.
I have thought of one other advantage of the system. I've got a few friends that often do some descending and have forgotten to turn the lock off.
Yes.
So I'm not going to mention any names, but this could be the system that sort of stops them from doing that.
Yeah,
so,
if you're forgetful.
This is the way. Yeah. That's it. So, Fox Live Valve. As you can sort of tell, we're both sort of impressed by the technology, impressed by sort of what it's actually capable of doing, but at the moment,
I'm unsure. I'm definitely not sold on it. We're gonna have to, I guess, give it a bit more of a opportunity. I mean, maybe I think I'd like to try it on a more trail orientated bike, so slightly more travel. Perhaps you'd notice the difference a bit more then. You'll see more of an advantage because obviously that bike is less efficient in the first place, because you have more travel there. So there could be more gains on a bike like that, which is maybe why some brands are fitting it to those type of bikes. So there's this is not the closing the book on this. I think this is just opened the first chapter.
No,
and,
I think
we shall see where it leads.
Exactly, like for a company like Fox to be sort of like pushing the technology, I think is actually that's a real positive. As you said, in whether or not this is like going to change and revolutionise things, well, it's difficult to know, isn't it, at the moment? So there we go.
Yeah.
So there you have it, Fox's Live Valve. That's our first opinions of the new technology. Well, thanks for watching, and don't forget to subscribe to keep up with our latest releases. And if you've got any comments about this technology or other things in general, then please put it in the comment section below.